So today we're also going to try to kind of combine some of the things that we've learned before. And we're going to try to combine user input as well as file input or output, or actually both. And we'll also combine that and do a little bit of loops again and stuff, the kind of standard things. So what we're going to try to do is we're going to write a program that has a participant list. And it's going to ask for user input continuously until our participant list is full, or until enough people have registered, or until it's kind of booked out. And it's going to take all this data and it's going to write it to a file. And then later on, we're going to read this data out from the file, and we'll look at it a little bit and maybe do some simple statistics or something just to kind of get a feel of the data and maybe do a little bit of manipulation with that. But first let's focus on actually getting this participation list. And so to start off, let's just define a variable called participant. Oh, so we're still in the comments here. I actually need to close the comments from up here. And we'll make a variable called participant number. And this is going to be the amount, or the number of participants that are going to be allowed to register. So let's just start off with 5 participants right now, like such. So our participant number is 5. So that means we'll just allow 5 participants to register. And now we have to store the participant data somewhere. So let's just make a new variable called participant data. And we'll just keep it as an empty list right now, because we actually do want to store it in order and everything. And we don't want to get the participant data mixed up. We want them all to be grouped nicely. So orderly, like in participant number, but we also want all the participant data to be in one kind of grouping, so that each participant has their appropriate data. So what we're going to do is actually we're going to have a list of participant data, and each element in this list is itself going to be a smaller list that contains the participant data. So for example, the first element in participant data would be the first participant, and it would contain all of their appropriate data. And then the second element in participant data would be the second participant. And that list, or that small list that would be the second participant, would contain all the data of the second participant. So yeah, let's just start off. And let's just start off with the input, and then we'll go at it step by step. So yeah, let's make a while loop maybe. And we'll start with first, let's make a value called registered participants, and we'll use this as kind of a counter. So registered participants will have v equal to 0, and this we'll use in our while loop. And so to create the while loop, we'll type in the keyword while, and we'll open and close the parentheses. And what we want to do is, while our registered participants are less than the participant number, we want to be able to allow registration. So while registered participants is less than the participant number. Now you may notice my variable names are kind of long, which is a little bit inconvenient, rather than just writing reg part and 5 or something. But this is just kind of for completeness, just so that we see really what's going on. We have an overview and we can kind of follow what the variables are called. So this is good practice for good variable naming, even though the variable names themselves are kind of long and maybe a little bit cumbersome to deal with. But yeah, so we'll finish our while loop, and we'll have our colon here to indicate that we want to start it. So this is our while loop kind of definition. And so, well, what do we want to do? Well, we want to first ask the user for a set of participant data. So we have to think about, what do we want to know from them? What information do they have to put in when they register? And so maybe let's just go with the name. Let's go with the country of origin, and let's go with the age. And we want to store all this data in kind of a temporary place. So the first thing that we want to do is we want to create the variable that's going to store all our data before we can actually ask for input. So we'll start off and we'll make a variable called temp part data. And so this is going to be short for temporary participant data. So we don't really want to write out that whole word because that's pretty long. So we'll just kind of shorthand it, and we'll write temp part data for temporary participant data. That's just our variable name, just for convenience. And we'll have it be equal to an empty list. And so this is the list that we're going to put the individual participant data inside. So it's going to have kind of the name as the first element, then it's going to have the country of origin as a second element, and then it's going to have the age as the third element. And so this will kind of overwrite every loop, but we will add it to the participant data in the end. So yeah, so this is just our kind of temporary data holder. So yeah, let's start off, and the first thing that we want to do is we want to ask for the name. So let's save the name in the variable called name. And so we'll have name, and here we're going to ask for user input. We'll just ask them to input their name. So we write name is equal to, and this allows us to save the input inside a variable. And then we'll just write input. And so here we get the input keyword, which indicates that we're going to ask for user input. We'll open and close parentheses, and inside we'll open and close the quotation marks and give some directions to the user so that they actually know what we want. So let's put inside, please enter your name. Please enter your name. So we're just telling the user we want them to input their name. And then we'll do a colon and some space just for formatting so that they don't start typing at the end of the E here and it all looks kind of weird. We don't need to cast it as anything because we want to keep it as a word anyway, so we don't need to put anything in front of here. So we can just leave it as this. Now we want to add this to our temporary data. So what we want to do is we want to take our name and we want to put it inside of this list. So the best way to go about that would probably just be to take the temporary participant data, or the temp par data variable that has our list, and to it we just want to append. So we take our temp part data and then we do the dot, which indicates that we want to do something to it. And what we want to do is we want to append. So we write append, and we open and close the parentheses, and what we want to append to it is the name. So what this is going to do is it's going to take the temporary participant data list, and to the end of it, it's going to add the name, but since there's nothing inside it, our first element is just going to be the name. And so the next thing that we want to ask for is the country of origin. So we'll just create a variable for that too. We'll call it country. And here we'll do the same thing as above. We'll just ask for user input. So we'll say to save the user input. That's why we have this kind of country equals. So we're going to ask for the user input and we'll save it in country. And here we'll use the input keyword to prompt the user for input. And we open and close parentheses to kind of complete this prompt. And technically it would work by itself here, but we want to just give the user some direction. So we'll open and close quotation marks, and inside we'll write, please enter your country of origin. And then we'll add a colon and a space again just for some formatting. Yeah, so we're doing pretty much the same thing as above. Above here we asked for the name, please enter your name. Down here we've asked for the country, so please enter your country of origin. We're saving the country in a variable called country. We're saving the name in a variable called name. Technically we could also reuse the same variable, so we could make a general variable called x, for example, and we could save the name input in x and then add it and the country input in the same variable and just continue overwriting it. But we'll just leave it like this just to have the code be a little more clear so that we can actually see what's going on and have some neat code that can easily be understood afterwards. So yeah, we don't have to do anything to the input here either because we take it in as a word and we want to keep it as a word, or we want to keep it as a string. Yeah, so we won't do anything here either. So we'll just keep this here as a country, and we want to add that to the end of our temporary participant data. So we'll take our temp part data variable, which stores our temporary participant data. So it started off as empty, then we added name to the end of it, and now we want to append. So we do dot append. The dot is that the dot kind of indicates that we want to do something to this temporary participant data, or this temp part data variable. And what we want to do is we want to append. And we want to append to the end of it the country. So now our temp part data has the name as the first variable because we added that to the end of an empty list, and it has the country as a second variable, or as a second element. So its name is the first element, country is the second element. And now we just want to ask for the age. So we'll create another variable that's going to save the age, and the age is going to be equal to, and then we ask for input, and you open and close the parentheses, and then open and close the quotation marks, and then we write here, please enter your age, and then colon and a space, just for formatting again. And now the age is actually going to be an integer, so we'll want to kind of convert it to that. So if we just get this input, we usually get a string or a word, so something that has quotation marks around it, which generally isn't a problem. But so like, for example, here, it's not a problem generally for country, and it's not a problem for name. But if we want to have age, we want it to be an integer, so we have to put int around it. So this will, what this int does is that everything inside, if possible, will be converted to an integer. So what we would get from this input, for example, if the age is 25, if they input 25, what we would get is 25 like that. And what happens if we put int around this is that it will try to convert it to an integer. So int of the word 25, or of the string 25, so we see the quotation marks here, will actually go to the number 25. And so our age is going to save the number 25 rather than the word 25. Subtle difference, but it really is a difference. Yeah, so that's, maybe we can just leave that there too. Yeah, so that's what we're doing here. I mean, we've seen this before, but it's always nice to recap. And now we also just want to add this to the end of our temporary data. So we'll take our temp part data, and to it, so we have the dot here, to it we want to append, the age, just like such. And so now our temp part data looks like this. So we've got name as the first element, country as the second element, and age as the third element. So we've added name to the empty list, which puts it here in first place. We've added country to this list, so country is going to be the second element, and then age is added to the end of name and country. So we've got name, country, age. So append always adds to the end. And so this is what our temp part data looks like at the end of this. And now all that we need to do is we need to save our temporary data inside of our participant data. So what we want to do is we want to take our participant data, so our variable that we defined up here, and to it we want to append, and we want to append all the data. So we want to append this whole list. So we actually want to append the whole temp part data. So we want to append the whole thing to it. Yeah, and so the way that would look like now, so the participant data would now look like temp part data. So this is how the participant data looks like after the first run through. And if we actually put in the temp part data, which is what we have here, so what it actually looks like is like this. So this is what our participant data looks like. Well, we can just put this on a new line. We've got, let's just break this up a little bit here. So we've got our participant data, which looks like this, which has a list that contains the temp part data because we appended that to it. And the temp part data actually looks like this. It's a list in it by itself, and it contains the name, country, and age. So this is all one element. This is the first element, but it itself is a list. So we've seen this before, but we'll just kind of see it over and over again to have it be a little bit more common, a little bit more, sensical. Yeah, so that we just kind of get used to putting all sorts of things inside lists. And so this is really advantageous for us because this one element here inside of the participant data is just one participant, and it itself stores a lot of information about the participant. So we know that each element in the participant data is a participant, and each participant itself has a name, country, and age data. So that makes it very easy for us to access this data. It makes it very logical. And so, yeah, so what is the last thing that we want to do, or what is the last thing that we need to do? Since we're inside of a while loop, and we don't want to keep this infinite, and since a participant is now registered, we want to increase the registered participants number. So we want to go registered participants. And now, since someone is registered, we have to increase the number of registered participants. So we can do the short form and just do plus equals 1. So this just kind of increments the registered participants by 1. It's the same as writing registered participants, so it would be the same as if we write this. If we write equals to registered participants plus 1. So this and this is the same, and this is just short form, and since registered participants is a really long variable name, it's much easier to just write it like this. So yeah, I mean, we'll leave this here too, just so that you can kind of remember if you forget or something, but it's just nice to learn these short forms since we want to just write as little as possible, but we want it to work just as well. Yeah, so we've got our registered participants here. And now we're not saving it in a file yet. We can do that in a second, and we can actually look at 2 ways to do that. But first, let's just run our code, and let's make sure it works. And maybe let's just put this number down to 2 right now, so that we only have to put in 2 participants rather than 5. So let's just run this, and now please enter your name. We'll enter here, we'll enter maybe Max. Country of origin, we'll put in the US, and then the age, we'll put in 21. And now the second participant, we can put in maybe Bob. Country of origin can be Canada, and the age can be 25. And so we see that after 2 runs through, so after 2 participants, our loop stops. We just kept it as 2 because we don't want to continuously just enter data. Now we don't really see our data being stored, so if we want, we can print it out. Maybe that would be a nice thing to do. So we can just run this one more time and actually print out maybe our temp part data, and also print out our participant data, just so that we write that small participant data, just to really see that our code is really doing what we want it to do. So let's run that one at a time. Let's put in Max here, and then the US for the country. Oh, well, should be capital, but whatever. 21. So here we see our temp part data, which is Max, US, and 21. And we see here that this is an integer because it doesn't have the quotation marks around it. And here we see our participant data. So it's a list, and in itself is the list that we have up here. And so now we can do again, Bob, Canada, and 25. And so now we see our temp part data has been overwritten. And so that's because at the beginning of the loop, we always make it an empty list. And so that means every time we finish a loop, we overwrite our temp part data and it goes back to being empty. So that's why we don't keep the data from before, but we just start off with an empty list every time, and we've overwritten it. And we see though that our participant data contains both the first participant as the first element, and so we've got the comma here, and this separates the elements. So this is all our first element, and the second element, which is the second participant. Cool. So we've got 2 participants. Each of these participants has data of themselves. So great, this is exactly what we want. So yeah, we can say that it works. So now what do we want to do? Well, we want to write this all to a file. And now there are different ways that we can go about this. We can either write this to a file every time we get input. So like every participant, we can immediately write to a file, or we can write it to a file all in the very end. Let's just go with the later. Let's just write everything to a file all in the very end. But I can kind of tell you while we're going through how you would do it the other way. But it doesn't really matter that much. So you can choose which way you want to do. It may be a little bit nicer just to kind of, once you have a complete participant list, to write it to a file, because it's a little bit more, I guess it makes a little bit more sense once you've got a complete list. Then you kind of write it all down rather than while everything is being created, but it's really up to you. So we'll create a new variable here and we'll call it the output file, or yeah, we'll call it the output file. So this is what we're going to write to. And so our output file is going to be equal to, and now to write to files, remember, we have to open a file. So we use the keyword open, and then we open and close parentheses, and then we open and close quotation marks, and inside of here, we want to put in the file name. So we're going to put in participant data. Yeah, and maybe we can just make it a .txt, and then we put in a comma, and then here we're going to put quotation marks, open and close again, and now we indicate what we want to do. We want to write it. And now I don't actually have the participant data.txt file on my computer, but if I don't have it here and I use the write keyword, or the W, which stands for write, then it would automatically be created. And remember, you have to be careful. If you use the W, then it will overwrite the file if it already exists. If it doesn't exist, it will create it. Yeah, so this is our output file, and so this is what we're going to write to. Now, before we do anything else and maybe forget later, let's make sure we close the file at the very end. So we'll do our output file and then .close. So this is just to make sure that our file closes correctly and there's no errors with anything with the file writing or such, that everything is done correctly. And so we'll just leave this here at the very bottom, and we'll continue to write code above it, but just so that we don't forget later. So we'll leave that here. And now what we want to do is we just want to go and we want to write to this file. So a nice way to do this, if we just loop through our participant data. So we're going to make a for loop, or a for in. So we'll start off with the for keyword, and then we'll use our temporary variable, and let's call it a participant, because that's really what it is. So so this is going to be our temporary variable that takes on each of the participant data elements one by one. So we have our participant here. So for participant in, and now we want to go through the registered participants, and then the colon to indicate that we want to start the loop. So what are we doing? We're using a for in loop, and we're going to go through the registered participants element by element, and each element is going to be temporarily stored in the participants, and each element is what we see here is a list in and by itself here, like this and like this. So this is one element, this here is another element. So that's what our participants are going to look like. Now, since we have lists there, we also need to probably just loop through these element by element. So we can do another for in loop, and we can do for, and then this is going to be our data, so we'll call the temporary variable data. For data in participant, we'll do the following, so colon. So what are we doing here? Well, our registered participants, for example here, would look like this. So we would have the first participant here being the first element, the second participant being the second element. And so our participant would first take on the value of the first participant like this. And then our data is going to loop through this. So it would first take on max, then US, and then 21. And then our participant is going to take on the value of the second participant. And then our data is going to loop through that. And the data is going to take on the value Bob, Canada, and 25. And so that's how that's going to work. And so we remember that if we have a for loop here, it will always just every time this loop is completed, this for loop will get called. So this loop is going to get called every time we have a new participant. Okay, so what do we want to do to this data? Well, this data we actually want to write to the file. So we're going to take our output file, and we're going to do something to it. And what are we going to do? We're going to write to it. So we'll do the dot to indicate that we want to do something to it, and then we'll use the write keyword to indicate that we want to write to it. And inside of here, we want to put in what we want to write. So we want to write in the data. And so this is just going to write our data in. Now there are some things that we need to pay attention to. One of the things is that we can only write strings to files. So we can only write words, so anything in quotation marks. And that's not a problem until we reach 21. And once we reach 21, that's going to be a problem because 21 is an integer or a whole number. And we can only write strings. So just to be safe, we'll put the str keyword around data, like so. So we open and close parentheses around data and have the str. And so what this would do is, this is very similar to this int above here, but let's just walk through it first. What this does, so what str does to the integer 25 is it turns it into the word 25 or the string 25. So what we had up here is the int around something. So the int around a word tries to convert the word to an integer like we did up here. And now the str around a number or around anything else tries to convert this to a word. So str of a number, so string of a number, for example, would be the number with quotation marks around it, but it would be the word 25 rather than the integer 25. And now we're not going to have a problem, and we can write to the file. Now, something else that we need to keep in mind is that when we write to the file like this, different than when we print something. So when we print something, we see here that it automatically goes to new lines and there's new formatting. But when we write, that's not going to be the case. So if we, for example, take our first participant and we go through it, then what our file would actually look like, so for data and participants, and if our first participant is this, and so data would take on max first, what our file would actually look like would be max, and that's because that's what it's going to write. And then data is going to take on US, and then it's going to write US like this, and then it's going to take on 21, and then we're going to write the word 21. So this is what our file would look like, and there isn't any actual formatting done there because that would be pretty terrible if it just added extra formatting. So we need to do that manually. We need to add, if we want, but we definitely want that, we need to add extra formatting. And so what we want to do first of all is, after every time we wrote a word to it, we want to just add a space. So to the output file, what we want to do is we want to do something to it. We want to write and open and close parentheses. And what we want to do to it is we want to write a space. So we'll just open quotation marks, put a space, and then close up quotation marks. And so what that's going to do is it's going to add a space here, since this is our first element and our first participant. And it's going to add a space here. And, well, it's actually also going to add a space here. And then what we want to do at the very end is we want to separate our participants by line. So we want our first participant, for example, to be this. And then on a new line, we, for example, want our second participant. So just to kind of draw it out, here we would want, let's see, yeah, this is good formatting. So here we would want to have Bob space Canada because of this space here, space 25 space. So we want these to be on two different lines. So how would we do that? Well, we would, at the end of a for loop, since we want to end this after all the data has been written, once our for loop inside here is complete, so once we've written all the data separated by spaces, we want to write a new line to the file. So we'll go output, file, and what we want to do to it is we want to dot write, open and close parentheses, and what we want to write to it is open and close quotation marks, a new line. So that's the backslash, which indicates that the next character is going to have a special function, n. So we remember that the backslash n is a special character that puts in a new line rather than putting in an n or anything. So the backslash n has a special function, which is writing a new line. Yeah, so this is what we're doing. We're just looping through this. We're writing all our data separated by spaces on one line for one participant. And once we've finished a participant, so we'll see here that this indentation is the same as this. That means we're no longer inside of this for loop here because we're not indented inside. So once this for loop here is complete, then we go out of the loop and then we write this line, or then we execute this line, and this line is going to add a new line after it's written everything on one line. So then we jump to the new line in the file. And then we go through all the participants like that, and then we close our file at the very end. So that's also important. So let's just run it once. Yeah. And so we'll just use the same things we used before. Max US like this, 21. And so here we get the printing from the temp part data in our participant data. So this is the temporary data, this is our participant data that we're going to write later. And here we'll write Bob and Canada and 25. Oh, so we've gotten an error. What did we get an error about? We got an error about for participant and registered participants. So an int object is not. So we used the wrong variable name here. So we wanted to loop through a number registered participant. What we actually want to loop through is the participant data. Participant data. So what I tried to do is I tried to loop through the number of registered participants, which is just going to be 2. That doesn't really tell us much. We actually want to loop through the actual participant data, which we had up here. So that's what we want to loop through. So yeah, let's run this again, and now it should work. So we'll put in max and US here and 21. And so this is the data that we're going to write later. And then Bob. And here we'll have our Canada and 25. And now it works, so we don't get the error anymore. So the problem was that here I had the registered participants, which is a number. And so we can't do a for in loop in a number because there are no elements to go through in a number. But here we actually have a list of the participant data, which is what we actually want. And so here we can go through element by element. Yeah, so now we've written it to a file. And now the next thing that we're going to look at is reading everything from this file and using that nicely and effectively and just kind of seeing the data. Now that we've looked at writing participant data to a file, like we've done in the last video, and so we still have all our code here, we're going to look at reading this data from a file now, and maybe doing some interesting stuff to it. So we still have all our code here from above. We can leave it there for a little bit, but we're not going to really do a lot with it. So this section we can kind of consider complete. And we'll just deal with reading all this data from a file now. So we're going to create a variable, and in it we're going to save in the file that we want to read. So we'll read in an input file. And so we'll just call the variable input file because this is going to be the file that we read all of our participant data in. So it's going to read all of our input, and it's going to be equal to, and to open the file, we're just going to use the keyword open. So this lets us open a file, and then open and close parentheses. And then we open and close the quotation marks. And in here, we're going to put the file name. And so to make sure that we get it right, let's just take the file name from up here and copy paste it, just to avoid typos. And so this is going to be the file name that we're going to import, or that we're going to open. And instead of writing it like we did here, now we're going to read it. So we're going to use the R keyword. And so this is going to let us read the file. Whereas up here, we were writing to it, or we created it if it doesn't exist yet, or we overwrite it every time and we open it. Now we close the file, and then we can read it. So it's important that we close the file before we try to open it again, or else we're going to get into trouble. So we want to just remember that we close the file down here. So we open this file up here, and then we close it, and now we can open it in a different format again. And let's just, before we do anything else, let's just make sure we close it. So let's take our input file and let's just dot close it. So we want to do something to it, hence the dot. What we want to do is we want to close it and then open and close the parentheses because the close is a function. And we'll just go above it and we'll press enter a couple of times just to move the close down. But you know, we may forget about it after a little while or something, but we just want to make sure we have it there. You know, good practice. And so we'll just leave that kind of hanging down here at the bottom, and then we'll write our code in here. So what we're going to do is we're just going to read our file line by line first, and let's just kind of put it back in, and actually let's just read it into a different list first. So how are we going to go about that? Well, the first thing that we want to do is we want to create a list that we're going to save all of our file data in. So let's just call this list the input list. This is just the variable name, and this input list is just going to store all the data that we're going to read in here. So we're going to take our input list and we're just going to make it equal to, and then open and close parentheses. So it's going to be an empty list. And then what we're going to do is we're going to read through this input file line by line. Okay, so how would we do that? Well, before we saw there are several ways to read an input file, but we'll just use the kind of standard easy way. We'll use a for loop because for loops are really nice to deal with. So we'll do for, and our temporary variable is going to be the line. And so this is going to contain each line in the file. And we're going to go for line in the input file. And so if we remember from our last video what this for loop actually does, and then we have the colon here, what this for loop actually does is it reads the input file line by line. So we could also use, you know, the input file.readLine, or we can read the whole thing and save it in a variable. But this for loop is a really nice method of just reading the input file line by line without really having to keep track of much. So yeah, through this we'll just kind of read through the whole file in individual lines. And we want to save all of our data in a temporary line element, so that we kind of want to create the same thing that we had up here. We want to have something similar to our temp part data. So each participant should be in its own little list, and that we want to append to our input list. So our input list should contain, each element should be a participant, and each participant should again be a smaller list that contains all that data. So we want to just be able to add all of that into, we just want to kind of be able to get back our participant data from before, from the file. So how would we do that? Well, let's just create a variable where we're going to temporarily save our data. So we'll just call it temp participant, like this. And this is just going to be a temporary, or this is going to be a variable that's going to temporarily store participant data. So each line is going to be overwritten because it's also in the for loop. So every time a new for loop starts, it's going to be immediately be overwritten. And what are we going to make it equal to? So we're going to do some things to this line. And yeah, we're going to use some special features on strings. And I'll write it out first, and then I'll show you exactly what they do. So that, so that we know exactly what they do. So let's just write out first what we're going to do. We're going to take our line, and then what we're going to do to it is first we're going to, so we'll have a dot to indicate that we want to do something to it, and we're going to strip it. And then what we're going to do, so we have dot strip, and then open and close parentheses. And then what we want to do to it is you want to split it. So we'll write a dot split. And now let's talk about what each of these things does, because it's just kind of weird to just bring them up. And so let's have a little example. So we'll just have one or two lines of comment here. And so what does this do? So we know that our line is going to be a string, because each of our lines is a string, because we wrote everything in strings, as we remember up here from writing the data. So we wrote everything in strings. So all of this is just a big word pretty much. So for example, if we read in the first line of input file, what we're going to get in line is going to be max US and 21, and then it's going to be inside of quotation marks. So it's going to be one big word pretty much. And then we're going to have to actually we still have this space after here, and then we have the new line character. So this is kind of what we have. And so what we're doing with the strip is just that we're gonna take away this new line, so we can actually kind of put in here what we want to take away. So what we can do in here is we can do strip and then \n. So what this does is if we call on here, if we have this word or this string, and onto it we call dot strip and the \n like this, what this does is it turns it into the exact same string like this, but it takes away that \n like that. So that's what the dot strip does. And now let's see what the dot split does. So on a new line, let's have our edited string. So this is what we get with this. So this is what the dot strip does. And now on this, so this is what's left over, we're going to call dot split. So on this, we're going to do dot split. And so we can do this on strings. And what this does is it splits it. And what does that mean? Well, it means every time there's a space, it considers that as a new element, and it puts it all into a list. So if on a word like this with spaces and stuff, we call dot split, what this turns into is it makes a list, and each element is separated by spaces. So the first element is going to be max, because it's a string, and then we have a space here, and what the dot split does is this means that the first element is done. So as soon as we have a space, that means that was the first element, and the next element is to come. And so the next element is US, and so since it's all in a string in here, it's going to be US like this. So that's, now we've got another space, so that means this is going to be, that was our second element, and so we add a comma, and then here we have 21, and it's going to be the word 21 since it's all inside quotation marks, and then we have another space, but we don't need to have a space here, so if the line would also end, or if that would be the end of the string, then it would still put this as the last element. So what this does is it splits the word, or it splits the sentence or the string by the spaces, and everything that's separated by spaces are different elements, and it puts it into a list for us. So what we're doing here with this line.strip with the \n, so first we take away this \n, like here, and then we split it, and then we have our individual elements as strings inside of a list. So that's what this line.strip.split does, which is really, really convenient for us, because otherwise we would have to individually go through each character and see when we have a space and, you know, try to format it ourselves and put it into a list. So it's really convenient, this dot split, that it just, every time there's a space, it cuts it off and it makes it a new element, and it puts it all into a list for us. And so this is actually what, for the first line, what our temp participant would look like. It would look like this list. And so what we can do is, we can just take our input list, and to it we can just append the temp participant, like this. And so, just to kind of see it too, let's just print out the temp participant for participant, okay. And afterwards, let's also let's print out the input list, like this, so that we also really see it. So we've kind of explained it here, but we also want to see it. So yeah, we'll run the code. We'll have to do the input first again. We'll leave that like that for now, but we'll comment it out in a second so that we don't have to do it every time we want to read the file. But let's just leave it in there for now one more time, just to also see what we did last time. So yeah, let's just run this code once, and then let's just see what we get. So first we get asked for a name again. We'll just use the same as last time. Max and origin going to be US. Age is going to be 21. Then the second, so here we have our temporary part data from up here and our participant data, which is going to be written to the file. Next name is going to be Bob. Country of origin, we're going to have them be from Canada. Age is going to be 25. And so this is what we have from our temp part data here. So we've got Bob Canada 25. This is here our participant data, like this. So this is going to be what's written to the file. And now we've written it to the file and everything, we've closed it. And now we've opened a new file and we started going to this loop. And now we have the temp, so the first line is going to be the first line of the input file, which is going to be this, or now it's going to be this. And so we see here, max US 21, so that's our temp participant data. So this is what we get after we call the strip.split onto the line or onto the string. So this is what we get. And now we append this here to our input list, so here. And now we see our input list, which is currently this. And now our temp participant is overwritten to be Bob Canada 25. And that we again append back to our input list. And so we get our first participant here and our second participant here. And all of this is now in the input list. So this is exactly what we had before. But we kind of closed all that and we didn't reuse any of it. And we got the same kind of formatting back just from reading the file. So this is what we have now. And maybe now we'll just kind of comment out the things on the top so that we don't have to go through this every time. But yeah, it was maybe nice to just see one more time. But now we'll comment it down so that we don't see all this all the time. So now this is what we're left with our input list. Cool. So let's do something with it. Let's maybe save some of the data in a dictionary or something. So yeah, let's make one dictionary for age, and we just want to count how many times each age has been repeated, or how many times each age is going to be there. So we're going to have our variable called age, and we're going to make it equal to, and then open and close curly brackets. And that's just going to be our empty dictionary. So we have our variable age here, and in it we're going to save an empty dictionary. And now what we're going to do is we're going to loop through our input list, and we're going to add the age, which we know to be the second element, to our dictionary. So if it's not in the dictionary already, we're going to add it in. And if it is in there, we're going to add one counter to it. So if we have 21 in there, for example, once already, then we're going to say, well, 21 appeared twice. So yeah, so this is our goal right now. So this is what we're going to do to the age. Okay, so let's start off. Well, first we want to write a for loop. So we want to go through the input list now, one by one. So we're going to go through the input list using a for loop. So for, and now we're going to write part, which is going to be our temporary variable. And this is going to be short for participant, just so that, you know, it's a temporary variable. We'll just keep it short. So for part in input list and the colon. So this indicates we're going to start our for loop. And now what we're going to do is we're going to check first if this age here is already in the list. And if it isn't, we're going to add it into this, or if it's already in the dictionary, and if it's not, we're going to add it in. So what are we going to do? Well, we're going to use the fact that we know that our age is going to be the last element of this list. So what we're going to do is we're going to do if, and now since part is going to take on each participant one by one, so the first thing part's going to be is this whole list. We're going to do if part, and now from part, we want to access the last element. So we open and close square brackets, and we're going to access the last element like this. If part -1, so if the last element of, or if the last element in part, and so part is going to be a first element participant, and then it's going to be a second participant. If part -1, and now we're going to say, well, first let's see, let's say if it is inside, if part in H, so what we're doing is we're checking if the last element of part is in H, then what we're going to do is we're going to do age, and we're going to access the element part -1. So what we're doing is we're going into the age dictionary, and we're going to access the element, or we're going to access the value with the key part -1. Now part -1 is going to be the age, so inside of the age dictionary, we're going to access the value for the key, for the corresponding age, where the age is the key. And we're going to write this in a simpler form in a second, but we'll just leave it like this. So if the last element of part is an age, then we're just going to increase its value by 1. So the value corresponding to the key part -1 is going to be increased by 1. What we're going to do, otherwise, if it's not inside, else, so if the last element of part is not an age, and we will, don't worry, we'll simplify the syntax in a second, but we'll just leave it like this, just to kind of see it like this. But what we're going to do else is we're going to do age, and then the last element of part. So the key correspond. So we're going to add. We're just pretty much going to add this key to our dictionary. So inside the age dictionary, we're going to access the element part in the last element of part. So that's going to be the key that we're going to access, and we're going to make this be equal to 1. And so if this is not in age, what this is going to do, if we make it equal, is it's actually going to create the key value pair. So let's just make this a little bit easier though, and let's just save this all in a temporary variable to make it a little bit more overseeable. So we'll call a temporary variable called temp_h, or we'll create a temporary variable called temp_h, and we're going to make it equal to the last element of part, like we've done here. And let's just make it an integer, because it actually is an integer. So we'll use this int here. And this is going to turn whatever is inside here into an integer. So for example, for our first line, or for our first participant, the last element of part is going to be this. And so what we're going to get is int of 21 like this. And so our first temp age is going to be 21. And now we can replace this, and we can do if temp age is an age, and we take this away and replace it by temp age. So if our age is in the age dictionary, then for that age we add 1, so that means there is one more person of the same age. Otherwise, we want to create this key, and we're going to give it the value 1. So what this does really is, if it's not inside here, it's going to create the value, and it's going to create the key, and it's going to give it the value 1. So if we don't have the age in the dictionary yet, we're going to put it inside and give it the value 1, since it's appeared once. And if the age has already appeared in the dictionary once, we're just going to increase its value by 1. And at the end, let's just print the age like this. Okay, so let's just run the code, and then let's just see and let's just understand. So we'll run it once. Okay, so we get our input here, or output here, from just reading the input file. So this is our temp participant first, and then this is currently our input file, and now this is our temp participant in the second line, and now this is our input file after that. And now we get our dictionary, and we see that, well, first we check, so for part and input list, so first part takes on this list here, max US21, and now we make the temp age variable be equal to the last value in the participant, which is going to be 21, the word 21, and we make it an integer, so temp age is now 21. And we check if 21 in age, well, age is empty, so we do the else, and we do age 21 is equal to 1. So we create the key 21, and we give it the value 1. And now we do the same thing for the second participant, and we make now the temp age be equal to the last element of the second participant, which is 25, and we make it be equal to the integer. And then we check if 25 is an age. Well, the only thing in age right now is 21, so we go into the else, and then we say, well, age of 25, we're going to put the key 25 into the age dictionary, and we're going to give it the value 1, like we did here. And then we print the age. Okay, so let's just uncomment this output here. And now what we're going to do is we're going to uncomment everything that we had above here. And we're going to increase our participant number to 5. And we'll just put in some more participants just so that we can see how this dictionary works and how it's going to expand. So let's just run this code, and now we're going to have 5 participants. So we'll start off with what we had before. Max US 21, Bob Canada, and 25. Yeah, and so we kind of have this printing going on from here all the time, but we can just ignore that. But here we kind of see our participant data growing. Now our next participant is going to be Alice, and she's going to be from France, and she's also going to be 25. And then we're going to have Jen, and she's going to be from, where's she going to be from? She's also going to be from Canada, and we'll have her be 24. And so this is, for example, what we have right now. So we see our participants are now Max from the US 21, Bob Canada 25, Alice France 25, Jen Canada 24, and our last participant is going to be, let's have her be Hannah, and we'll have her be 23, and let's also just make her be from the US. It doesn't really matter. Whoop. Oh no. Well, now we messed up the country and the age. So the country is going to be 23, but we also want the age to be 23, or else we'll get an error in a second if we try to make an integer. So yeah, I kind of wasn't watching the input here. So we can see here, for example, that Hannah is both from the country 23 as well as is 23 years old, which is kind of silly, but whatever. It still works. So yeah, the computer doesn't know which countries we're talking about. This is just for us. Okay, so this is our kind of input that we've created, and we saved all this to the file. And now we closed our file and blah, 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 and we've opened it again. And now we've read it line by line, and we've made a nice little, so we've pretty much recreated this list here, but we've saved it in the input list. Now we have the empty dictionary, and we can see, for example, that we have two people that are age 25, one that's age 24, one that's age 21, and one that's age 23. So we don't really know their names anymore or their associated countries or whatever, but now we do have some nice statistics, for example, that tell us it just gives us some nice statistics that we can see, what the age distribution is like, for example. And so those are some there we can do stuff again too. For example, we could go through here and we could look for the biggest age or the oldest age by just looking at the key, for example. We can look at the most recurring age by looking at this this number here, this counter for the age. So we've seen writing data to files like we had up here. So this is our code from the very beginning. This is where we have participant data from user input and we write it to a file. Then we read this data from a file and we save it back into an input list, and we kind of reproduce the data format that we had above. And then we sorted the data and did some statistics, or prepared some ability for statistics using dictionaries. So we were able to kind of create repeating ages and all that stuff and count how many times an age repeated. And now the last thing that we want to do is maybe just do some very simple statistics with this. So maybe let's just find the maximum value of, well, let's find, so which maximum value do we want to find? Well, we first want to find the maximum age value, so the oldest age that attended the conference. And we also want to find the maximum counter for an age. So like what age group was represented the most. So those are the two things that we want to find. Okay, so how are we going to do this? Well, first we need to create certain variables that we want to save it in. So we'll just create the first variable called oldest, and let's just do this one at a time. So oldest is going to save the oldest age that attended the conference. And so there are different ways that we can do this, but we'll just keep it simple. And since we know that the age is not going to be bigger, or is not going to be smaller than 0, we'll just make oldest equal to 0. So we know there are not going to be any negative ages. I mean, technically the users could have entered negative ages, but we'll just assume they didn't, that everyone entered their correct age. Otherwise, you would have to do an if statement up here to check if the age is negative and stuff, which you can do. It's just adding an extra if statement and continuously asking the user for input using a loop or something. But we're just going to assume they were honest and stuff. So we'll just assume we have all good numbers and everything, which we do. Since we're inputting the data, we do. If you're developing this, or if you're creating this for other people to use, maybe you want to also implement if statements to check, did they input right numbers? Is the age, is it bigger than 0, for example? Is everything valid? Those are some things that you may need to keep in mind later. But we won't really worry about that too much here, since we just want to be able to get the examples flowing rather than working on all the kind of outliers. So yeah, we'll just start with the oldest and make that equal to 0, since, well, we know that because we inputted the age, that no age is going to be negative or anything weird. So yeah, so we'll stay with that. And so the first thing that we want to do is we just want to loop through this age, and we just want to pick the oldest age. So what we're going to do is we're going to do a for loop to go through the age dictionary, and we'll just do for, and then we'll just use our temporary variable and we'll call it temp age. So temp age is just going to correspond to a temporary age. You can notice we used it up here already, but it doesn't matter. It's going to get overwritten here, so this isn't going to interfere at all. And so we'll just use this as a completely independent variable. So it's going to be overwritten. It's going to have no connection to up here, except that the name is the same, but we're using it in a different context and everything. So like, if you want, you can call it something else. It doesn't really matter, but we'll just call it temp age because it's appropriate, because it's just a temporary variable of each element or if each key in age. So we'll do for temp age in age. So we'll be looping through here key by key. And so what we're going to do first is we want to check if this temporary age is bigger than the oldest, and if it is, we want the oldest to be equal to the temporary age. Otherwise we'll just leave it. So let's check. So let's write it out first, and then let's understand why we're doing it. So let's check first. If temp age is greater than oldest, then, so what are we doing here? We're seeing if the age that we have right here is bigger than the oldest age that we currently have stored. And if that's the case, that means the oldest age that we have stored currently is actually, in fact, not the oldest age. So what will we do? We'll make the oldest be equal to the temp age. It's that simple. So all we're doing is we're just looping through this age dictionary key by key, and so each key is an age, and we're checking if this age is bigger than the oldest age we have stored right now. And if it is, we just update our oldest age by making it equal to this temporary age. And then let's just first print the oldest age. Okay, so let's run our code. We still have the file created from before, so we don't actually need to input all the data. So the file is still there, and we can just use it directly. We'll just open it here in reading format, and then we'll do the processing of splitting it and appending it. And well, we've got some stripping going on here, and then we'll go through and then we'll create the dictionary like we've done in the last lesson. And so we either create the ages or we add one to the age if it already exists. And then what we're going to do here is we're going to find the oldest age, and then we're going to print it out. So let's see that. So what we print out here is we print the age dictionary that we've created, and we see 24, 25, 21, and 23. And we go through and we see, we see that we found the oldest age. Now something that we can also do, for example, is we can look for the youngest age. So we can go youngest, and let's just keep it simple, and let's say youngest is equal to 100. So like, I mean, there are going to be more intricate ways that you can do this later by choosing like a certain element, for example, but we'll just stick with this. So we'll just have the youngest be equal to this. I mean, if you want to be really sure, then you should actually go through and take one element in here and have that be the youngest. So you should just pick a random element in here or a random key and have that be the youngest value, because it could be that 100 isn't even in your list and everyone is older than 100, which will give you the wrong number. But we're just going to keep it simple here because we don't want to focus on that too much. We want to focus on finding the youngest element. And so you can just use the same loop. So the loop that we use to find the oldest, so we go through age by age, or key by key rather, but each key is an age anyway. And we first check if the age is bigger than the oldest. And if it is, we'll have the oldest be equal to this new temporary age. And then we can also check if our temp age is smaller than the youngest. So just like we did above, but now rather we're seeing if it's smaller than the youngest. And if it is, then our youngest is going to be equal to this temp age. Yeah, so that's all we're doing. We're just first we're seeing if this age is bigger than the oldest, and if it is, we're updating our oldest, and if it's younger than the youngest, we're updating our youngest. And technically, you could put an else if here, because if it's bigger than the oldest, it's not going to be the youngest. But since our numbers are like this, 0 and 100, the first case both will be updated. So we'll just leave this in here as two if statements, but generally you can use an if and an else if, because your temporary age is either going to be the oldest or older than the oldest, or younger than the youngest, but it's not going to be older than the oldest and younger than the youngest, because that's not possible. Except if we define our parameters first, like we did here. But generally, you can always add an else if statement if your parameters are one of the keys in this dictionary. But yeah, so let's just run this. Oh, wait, we want to print the youngest in the very end. So print the youngest, or else we won't see anything. And here we go. So we see the oldest age is 25, and we also see that the youngest age is 21. And so let's also have let's also count. So most occurring age, let's count the most occurring age. So we'll do most occurring age is what we're gonna call our variable, and we'll just also have this be equal to 0 right now. I mean, technically, yeah, you could also again pick an element in here, but let's not really do that right now. Let's just focus right now on finding it. We can look at this stuff later in another lesson where it's more relevant. But here we'll just look at the most occurring age, and we'll also create a counter. So this counter will start at 0. And what this counter is going to do is it's going to count how many times each age occurred, or rather, it's going to be equal to this value here. So what we're going to do essentially is we're going to look at each of these values, and we're going to make the counter be equal to this value. And if the counter, or for the biggest value that the counter has, the most occurring age is going to have correspondingly. So if, for example, if we go through this dictionary, then the counter is going to take on the value 1 first, and because 1 is bigger than 0, most occurring age is now going to take on the value 24, and then the counter is going to take on the value 2, and since 2 is bigger than 1, the most occurring age is going to be 25, like here, and then counter is going to take on 1, and since 1 is less than 2, the most occurring age is going to stay at 25, so it's not going to change, and the same thing for 23. Since 1 is less than 2, the most occurring age is going to stay at 25, and it's not going to change. So how would we do that? So let's check. So what do we want to check? Well, we want to check if this value here, if this value to the corresponding key is bigger than our counter. So how would we do that? Well, we check if, and now how do we access this value for the key? Well, we go into our age dictionary, and the key we have here as the temp age. So if the value corresponding to the key given by temp age is greater than the counter, then we're going to make the counter be equal to the value corresponding to the key of temp age. So what does this mean? Well, we're going into the age dictionary, and so our temp age is going to take on the values, or rather the keys 24, 25, 21, and 23, and each time we're going to check. So age with the key 24, so if we have, for example, temp age be 24, is actually going to give us this value here. So age and then the key 24 is going to give us 1. So if 1 is greater than 0, then we're going to make a 0 counter equal to age and temp age of 24, which is 1. So here. And then for 25, age of 25 will give us 2. And then we'll check 2 is greater than 1, yes. So we'll make counter equal to age of, and then 25 is going to be in here, which is 2. So counter is going to be equal to 2. And now age of, and now temp age is going to be 21. So age of temp age so age of 21 is 1. And is 1 greater than 2? No, so we're not going to go into this. And the same thing for 23. Since 1 is not greater than 2, we're not going to go into this either. Now, of course, there could be times where we have, for example, repeating or competing maximum values, such as we could have, for example, 2 25-year-olds and 2 21-year-olds, and then we wouldn't find all the cases, and you can account for special features, so you can see if the number occurred, and if it did occur, then you can add all these ages to a list, for example. So if 25 and 21 both had 2 people, so if 2 participants were 21 and 2 participants were 25, then for the most occurring age, we wouldn't just have 1 value, but we would have 2, and we could save those in a list, for example. But those are just different ways of dealing with data. But well, right now we don't have to deal with that, so we can just kind of stick with an integer. But otherwise, if we have, for example, 2 most occurring ages, we would have to have a list, and we would append both of these ages to the list. And then we would check not greater, but we could also check greater than and equal to. I mean, we can also do that now. So, and then if we check greater than and equal to, then we could also append it to a list. But like, for example, for iData right now, it's not going to make that big of a difference. I mean, we're also kind of cheating because we know our data. So if you kind of went in blind and you didn't know your data, then you should check greater than or equal to, and you should still do this, and then you should have the most occurring age be a list rather than just an integer, and every time you go in here, you should append to the most occurring age rather than making it equal to. So that's the last thing we're going to do. We're going to make the most occurring age be equal to the temp age. So that's, the temp age is just the key. And so our counter is going to be the value corresponding to the key, or the value corresponding to the age. And our most occurring age is going to be the age corresponding to the biggest value or the biggest participant count. So let's also print out, and maybe let's do a little bit more fancy printing here, most occurring age is, and then colon, and then we won't add a space here because we're going to add a comma. And this comma is going to let us just put in the most occurring age variable. And even though it's an integer, because we put a comma here, we can just leave it like that, and the print will take care of that and put it in as a string. And the comma is actually also going to add a space, so we don't need to put a space after the colon here. And then we put in another comma, so we're going to write some more stuff. So the most occurring age is whatever, and then we'll write with, and then we'll end the string here again, and another comma, and now we're going to put counter. So now we're going to put in the counter number, so that's going to tell us how many participants were like that, and the comma is going to take care of making this a string for us, or a word, and the comma is also going to add spaces, and then we'll put in here finally participants. So what this is going to print is it's going to print the most occurring age is, and then a space, and then it's going to print the most occurring age, and then it's going to print with, and then it's going to print the counter or the number, and then participants. So it's going to print something like with most occurring age is number with X many participants. So yeah, let's just run this and see this in action. So we see we've got our age dictionary here. We've got the oldest age is 25. We've got the youngest age as 21. And we've got the most occurring age is 25 with 2 participants. So that's what we have here. And that's what we found with the counter and with the most occurring age. Yeah, so cool. Now we just did some kind of simple statistics or kind of simple analysis of, you know, the most occurring age. If we liked, we could also apply this to the country, for example. And not a lot would change. All we would have to do is we would just pretty much use the same thing as we did here, and we would take the int away maybe, and instead of looking for age, so instead of looking for the -1, we would look for well, let's see if we can. Nah, we can't. So let's print the input list, and then we can see where our country is saved at. So if we run this one more time and just print the input list, then we can see our order is name, country, age. So instead of having -1 here, for example, we could have either -2, which is the second last element, or we could have 1, which is the second element, and well, in this case, the second last element, or the second element. So first element, second element are the same. So the index 0, 1, or index -1, -2. That would both correspond to the age. So if we want, we can actually do that. Maybe we can do that real quick, yeah. So we'll just do this really, really easy. And we're going to take all of our code here. And we're just going to copy this. And we're going to, let's go under the age here. And we're going to paste it. Because our format is going to be so similar. And we want to avoid as much as possible writing code. So like, because writing code takes time and we want to save time. So if we've done it before, why would we do it again? We'll just take what we have, and we knew how to do it up here. And now we'll just tweak this a little bit to be appropriate. So maybe first let's take out this print statement. And now instead of having an age dictionary, let's have countries. And so now our countries are going to be an empty dictionary. And now we're still going to go through the input list variable by variable. We want to take the integer away here, so we don't want to make this be an int anymore. And so we want to take that away, and then we can also take this comment away. And now, instead of taking the last element, which is the age here, we want to take the second element. So we can either use index 1 or index -2, so 0, 1, or -1, -2. Let's just go with 1, just because it doesn't make a difference. We can use either. And let's maybe just change the variable name. We don't even have to, but let's just do it. Let's call it temp country. And we'll change it here to temp country. So we're changing all of our temp age to temp country here. And we'll change it to temp country here again. And now there's one more thing that we need to take care of, and we don't want to go into the age dictionary again, but we want to use the country. So we want to go country here, and we're going to replace age by country, and now we're going to replace age by country here. And now we're really doing something extremely similar to what we did up here. So up here what we did is we went through this list one by one, and we looked at the last element, and we added each of these to the age dictionary, and if it's already in there, we increase its value by 1. And now we're doing the exact same thing for the countries. So we're adding it to a country dictionary, and we're adding the country. So we're adding a different value. We're adding the second element rather than the third, or rather than the last. And we're adding it to the country dictionary, like this. And we're using the temp country value rather than the temporary age value. But we're still going to count. So if the country occurred once, we'll create it and give it a value 1. If it occurs more than once, we'll just increase its count. And then let's just print out in the end. And then what we want to write is countries that attended, like this. And then, yeah, then we can just print the country like this. So yeah, so this will just print out the countries that attended, and then it's going to print out the country dictionary. So let's just run that once. Oh, so country is not defined. What we actually want to print out is the countries, and here we want the countries, not the country. So we want this up here. I just wrote country by accident. So we want countries, and we have the temp country here. So now it should work. So this here should be all of this. This is all going to be the same. So we're going through the countries. We're checking if our temporary country is inside this country dictionary. If it's not, then we'll add it. If it is, then we'll increase its count by 1. So yeah, let's run it. Okay, so we get our first output. This is our input list here. So this is all the data we gathered from the files. Then we print our age. So 1 person, age 24, 2 age 25, 1 age 21, 1 age 23. Now we print out the countries that attended. We have here, so it's only coming on a new line because this is kind of small, but if I drag it out, then we see the countries that attended are 1 from France. Then we've got 1 from the country 23, which is Hannah. So Hannah comes from the country 23, which was a little bit of an accident, but oh well, it happens. Then we've got 2 people from Canada, and we've got 1 from the US. So this is kind of the countries now we have in kind of a bit of a perspective. We don't really have the associated names or ages anymore, but now we just kind of have this country data. And then here we get the oldest age, what we did before, the youngest age, and the most occurring age is 25 with 2 participants. And now if we wanted, we could also do this again for the countries. Well, we couldn't really do the oldest or the youngest country, but we could check for the country with the last alphabetical letter or first alphabetical letter or longest name or whatever you want to come up with. So you can do something very similar here, and then you can also look for the most occurring country. So you can use code that's very similar to this if you like, and maybe look at the country statistics a little bit too, and just kind of come up with different criteria for these. But yeah, so that's really cool, that we can do all this, that we can kind of do these easy statistics. As you see, when we kind of put it in dictionaries, we lose some of the information that we have from the list here, but we gain additional information, or we don't gain additional information, but we make it easier to read. So we technically already knew that 2 people came from Canada, but it was very hard to pick out from here. And imagine we don't have 5 participants, but we have 100 participants. And so if we only care about the countries, then we can use something like this in a dictionary, and we just discard all the other data, and we just save everything in a dictionary, and we count it, and then we can see which countries attended. We can see how many countries attended by looking at the number of elements. we can see which country has the most participants or attendees, or which participants come from the highest number of participants that come from a certain country, which in this case would be Canada. So that would be the corresponding value here. So this dictionary, for example, makes reading the data and interpreting it a lot easier than just looking at this list. And so they all have their advantages and disadvantages. Here I have all my information, but I can't read it that well. Here I lose a little bit of information, but I make it a lot more readable. And same here. So there are pros and cons to using each, and now you've kind of seen the pros and cons of using lists. So lists are very nice, and they're very good at kind of keeping data stacked together that are relevant, and then we can use them as we like later and maybe put them into more user-friendly and readable formats like we did here with dictionaries or whatever else we may like.